Go ahead and judge me, but answer one thing first. If a man makes your son feel tolerated inside the house he calls home, how long are you supposed to stay grateful? I spent 23 years making sure Mason would never be abandoned again. Caleb paid for things, fixed things, and then went silent whenever people needed him to feel something. So I planned one birthday where my son would come first, even if I had to say the ugly part aloud. Caleb wrote the date on the cake receipt in his little black notebook and closed it with the elastic band. By dessert, everyone would finally know which of us had truly kept that family together. My name is Delaney Brooks. I am 44, and I organize private events for a hotel outside Phoenix. Of course, people think that means I understand families because I can arrange perfect birthdays for strangers. I never claimed to be cruel. I only wanted my son to have one evening without my husband's cold face hanging over the room. Ethan became quiet when I mentioned the party, and I took that quiet as proof that he knew I was right. I had been married to Ethan for 11 years. My son, Mason, was 19 when we moved into Ethan's house, so Ethan never became his father in any legal or emotional sense. He was simply the man who stayed. That mattered at first. When Mason's old car stopped working during his first semester at community college, Ethan drove 40 miles through heavy rain to bring him home. He arrived soaked because he had given Mason his jacket while they waited for the tow truck. Later that night, Ethan made hot chocolate and placed 3 mugs on the coffee table. Mason complained that it was too sweet. Ethan drank his without saying anything. I remember watching them from the stairs and thinking I had finally built something stable. Stability had always been my problem. Mason's biological father, Grant, left when Mason was 7. He missed birthdays, school events, and most child support payments. I worked front desk jobs and counted every dollar before buying groceries. 2 cans of soup, 1 loaf of bread, 4 days until payday. Counting kept me calm. Then Ethan entered our lives with his steady job, his paid-off house, and his habit of fixing problems before anyone asked. A leaking faucet disappeared. A late bill was handled. Mason needed tuition, and somehow the payment was made by morning. That was how Ethan loved people. It was also how he avoided them. If I asked whether he thought Mason was wasting his life, Ethan would open his laptop and talk about numbers. If I said I felt alone, he would ask what practical change I wanted. Of course, he never raised his voice. People praised him for that. They did not live with the silence that came after every difficult question. Mason was turning 30 in 6 days, and he had moved back into our house 2 years earlier after losing another job. Ethan called the arrangement temporary. I called it what a mother does when her son needs help. That Tuesday evening, I spread party samples across the dining room table. Gold napkins, black plates, small cards with Mason's name printed across the top. The hotel bakery had agreed to make a dark chocolate cake with bourbon frosting, Mason's favorite. Ethan came in from work carrying his metal lunchbox. He stopped beside the table and studied the decorations. He asked softly whether 30 guests were necessary. I told him Mason had been through a difficult year and deserved to feel supported. Ethan wanted to know if support meant paying for another party after Mason had ignored 3 job interviews. There it was. A number. A record. A reason. I told him he always turned family into a report. He did not argue. Instead, he placed his lunchbox on the floor, took a small black notebook from his shirt pocket, and wrote something inside it. Ethan had started carrying that notebook a few months earlier. He wrote down grocery totals, repair dates, and things people said during conversations. I thought it was another sign that age was making him rigid. He closed the notebook and asked what I needed from him. I gave him the bakery receipt. The cake cost $180. The dinner would cost more. Mason had also asked for a rented sound system because one of his friends wanted to perform. Ethan read the numbers twice. Then he asked whether Mason was contributing anything. I said the party was his gift. Ethan looked toward the hallway leading to Mason's room. Music pushed through the closed door. Mason had been home all day, but he had not taken out the trash or answered the email Ethan sent about a warehouse position. My husband rubbed his thumb across the edge of the receipt. That small movement used to mean he was trying not to say something harsh. Now I saw it as weakness. He always stopped himself. He always gave in. He told me he would collect the cake on his way home from work. Of course he would. I smiled, gathered the napkins, and reminded him that Mason needed one peaceful night. No questions about work. No comments about money. No disappointed looks. Ethan asked when his face had become a problem in his own home. For 1 second, the question landed differently than I expected. His voice was not angry. It sounded tired. I folded the last gold napkin into a sharp square. Then I told him not to make Mason's birthday about himself. Ethan stood there for another moment. After that, he picked up his lunchbox and walked upstairs. No argument. No slammed door. Just that same quiet acceptance. My sister Carla called 10 minutes later. She had always believed Ethan treated our family like a business project. When I told her about the conversation, she said Mason deserved to celebrate without being judged. She also suggested that I make the boundaries clear before the guests arrived. I agreed. The next part of my plan was simple. I would give a short toast at the party. Nothing cruel. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to remind Ethan that this night belonged to my son. On the dining room table, beside the gold napkins, lay the silver cake server Ethan had bought for Mason's 18th birthday. I'd polished it until I could see my own face. 3 days before the birthday, Mason came into my office at the hotel while I was checking table plans for a wedding. He wore the blue jacket Ethan had bought him for interviews, though Mason had not attended one in months. He closed the door and placed his phone beside my keyboard. My son said he had found an apartment near downtown. 2 bedrooms, a gym, a balcony facing the mountains. The rent was $1,800 a month, but he explained that living alone would help him focus and find stable work. I wanted to believe him. What mother would not? The problem was the deposit. Mason needed proof that he had enough money in his account, and he did not. He asked whether he could use our joint account for the application. He said the apartment manager would only look at the balance. No money would leave the account. I counted the flowers printed on the wedding folder. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I told him he could use the account information, but only once. Ethan was the primary account holder. Most of the money came from his salary. Still, I was his wife. It was our account. At least, that was what I told myself whenever Ethan started speaking about ownership. Mason smiled and kissed my cheek. Before leaving, he asked me not to tell Ethan until the application was approved. My husband could turn a simple plan into a meeting, a budget, and a list of risks. By the time he finished explaining why something might fail, the chance was usually gone. So I agreed to wait. That was my first deliberate lie. That evening, Ethan stood in the doorway of his home office, looking at an empty shelf. The space had held his father's old record player, a heavy wooden machine that had not worked properly in years. He asked whether I had moved it. I told him Mason had probably placed it in the garage during spring cleaning. My husband said he had already checked the garage. I kept arranging the birthday cards on the dining room table. 10 cards, 12 envelopes, 30 guests. Then Ethan asked whether Mason had sold it. His question annoyed me because of how calmly he said it. No accusation, no anger. Just a direct question, as if he already knew the answer and wanted to see what I would do with it. I told him he was becoming suspicious over an old piece of furniture. Ethan walked to the table and placed his phone beside the gold napkins. On the screen was an old photograph of the record player. He explained that he had photographed every item his father left him and saved the serial numbers with the insurance records. That did not fit the careless man I had built in my mind. Ethan forgot birthdays unless I reminded him. He could not remember the names of Mason's friends. Yet he had photographs, dates, and numbers connected to objects nobody else valued. Of course, I dismissed it as another one of his strange habits. I told him the record player was probably somewhere in the house and that we would look for it after Mason's birthday. Ethan studied my face for several seconds. Then he picked up his phone and wrote something in the black notebook. The next morning, Carla came over to help prepare gift bags. She knew Mason had sold the record player. He had needed money after losing his warehouse job, and she had driven him to meet the buyer in a grocery store parking lot. My sister believed Ethan had more than enough possessions. She said one broken machine should not matter more than Mason's future. I agreed, but I asked her not to mention it during the party. Carla hesitated. Only for a second. Then she folded another gift bag and said families sometimes needed to protect each other from unnecessary conflict. That was why I trusted her. Mason arrived near noon with his friend Tyler, a loud man who filmed everything for social media. Tyler had known Mason since high school and treated our house like an open bar. He walked into the living room, pointed his camera at the new decorations, and asked who was paying for all of it. Mason looked straight into the lens and said the family sponsor had handled it. Tyler laughed. So did I. Ethan was standing near the stairs with a box of replacement light bulbs in his hands. He heard every word. His face did not move. Tyler turned the camera toward him and asked whether the sponsor wanted to say anything. My husband placed the box on the bottom step. He asked Mason whether that was how he described him to his friends. Mason said it was only a joke. Ethan looked at me. I told him not to ruin the mood over one harmless word. After everything Mason had survived, he deserved to laugh inside his own home. Ethan reminded me that it was his home too. I answered that a house did not become a family just because one man's name was attached to it. The room went quiet. Even Tyler lowered his phone. For a second, Mason looked uncomfortable. Then Carla came in carrying the gift bags, saw our faces, and stopped beside the doorway. She understood enough to stay silent. Ethan picked up the light bulbs. Before walking upstairs, he told me he wanted the truth about the record player before the party. I said there was no truth to give him. He nodded once. Then he opened the black notebook and wrote down the time. I almost laughed at how dramatic it looked. To me, the notebook was where Ethan placed every feeling he was too weak to say aloud. The birthday was now 2 days away, and I had already decided how I would handle him. If Ethan tried to question Mason during the party, I would stop him publicly. Not to humiliate him. To protect my son. That afternoon, Mason's apartment application was submitted using Ethan's account as proof of funds. By dinner, Tyler's video had been shared through half our family group chat. The caption called Ethan our private ATM. Mason added a laughing face. I added one too. By 7 on Saturday evening, our house no longer looked like Ethan's house. Gold balloons covered the staircase. Music shook the framed photographs on the hallway wall. Tyler had placed 2 small lights beside the dining table, so every toast, gift, and reaction would look clear on video. 30 people came. Mason's old classmates filled the living room. My hotel friends stood near the drinks table. Carla moved between guests with a tray of appetizers, smiling whenever someone praised the decorations. Ethan arrived last. He entered through the front door carrying the chocolate cake with both hands. He was still wearing his grey work shirt. A dark line of sweat crossed his collar, and his hair was pressed flat from the heat outside. Nobody helped him. Mason stayed on the couch while Ethan carried the cake through the crowd. Tyler followed him with the camera and told everyone that the family sponsor had finally arrived. Several people laughed. Ethan placed the cake in the center of the table. Then he looked at Mason and asked whether this was really how Mason wanted to welcome him. Mason said Ethan was being too serious again. I stepped between them before the conversation could damage the mood. I told Ethan that Mason had waited weeks for this night, and that one joke did not require a family meeting. Ethan asked why every joke in our house seemed to have his name attached to it. The question was quiet. Too quiet for the music. People near us leaned closer. I told him that jokes only hurt when they contain some truth. A few guests laughed again, but not as loudly. Ethan looked at me. Then he glanced toward Tyler's phone and asked whether the camera was still recording. Tyler said it was live. My husband nodded once. He did not ask him to stop. He simply adjusted the cake so Mason's name faced the camera. After that, he took the silver cake server from beside the plates and placed it carefully in front of me. I read his calm as surrender. The party continued. Mason opened expensive headphones from Ethan without thanking him. He received cash from my sister and a bottle from one of his friends. Every gift went onto a chair beside him, while Tyler filmed close shots for social media. When it was time for the toast, Carla handed me the microphone. My plan had been simple. I would thank everyone, praise Mason for surviving a difficult year, and remind Ethan not to bring his disappointment into the celebration. Then Mason interrupted. He took the microphone from me and said people kept asking what he wanted most for his 30th birthday. A new job would be useful. An apartment would be better. But the perfect gift, he said, would be Ethan disappearing for one night. The room reacted in pieces. Tyler laughed first. Two of Mason's friends joined him. Someone near the hallway covered her mouth. My hotel manager, Diane, stopped holding her drink halfway to her lips. Ethan remained beside the cake. His hands were empty. His face was still. Mason gave the microphone back to me and asked whether I agreed. That was the moment I could have softened it. I could have told him to respect the man who had paid for the party. I could have ended the joke. Instead, I looked at Ethan and remembered every silent dinner, every practical answer, every time I had asked for warmth and received a solution. So I told him Mason was right. I said the birthday would be better if Ethan disappeared. I told him to leave the cake, stop watching everyone like a disappointed supervisor, and give my son one peaceful evening. Silence spread farther than the music. Then Tyler laughed again, and the room followed because people often laugh when they do not know what else to do. Mason lifted his glass. Carla did not. She lowered her eyes and began collecting empty plates, though several were still being used. Ethan looked at me for a long time. His expression did not break. He asked whether I was telling him to leave his own home after paying for everything inside it. I told him money did not buy the right to control the atmosphere. He asked whether that was my final answer. I said it was Mason's birthday, not a negotiation. My husband reached into his shirt pocket and removed the black notebook. He opened it beside the cake. With the music playing and Tyler's camera pointed at him, he wrote one short line. Then he closed the notebook. Ethan picked up his truck keys and said he understood. He wished Mason a happy birthday and told us to enjoy the gift we had requested. He walked toward the front door. Nobody stopped him. For half a second, I watched his back and saw the man who once drove through heavy rain to bring my son home. The picture came so clearly that my fingers tightened around the microphone. Then Mason started cutting the cake with the silver server. The blade scraped hard against the plate. I smiled for Tyler's camera and told everyone the uncomfortable part of the evening was finally over. The last guests left after midnight. Empty bottles stood between crushed gold napkins, and chocolate frosting had dried along the edge of the cake plate. Mason was still laughing with Tyler in the living room, replaying the video of Ethan leaving. Each time my husband reached the front door, Tyler paused the clip and zoomed in on his face. Carla did not laugh with them. She collected the silver cake server from the floor and placed it in the sink. Then she asked whether I knew where Ethan had gone. I said he was probably driving around until he calmed down. My sister asked whether I had tried calling him. 3 calls. 2 messages. No answer. I told her Ethan used silence whenever he wanted people to feel guilty. Of course, she knew that. She had complained about his cold behavior for years. Carla wiped frosting from the handle of the cake server. She said there was a difference between a cold husband and a man being told to disappear from his own house. That irritated me more than anything Mason had done. Carla had helped me prepare the toast. She had agreed that Ethan judged my son too harshly. Now she was standing in my kitchen as if she had only watched the humiliation instead of helping create it. I reminded her that Ethan had embarrassed Mason for years with questions about jobs, rent, and responsibility. Carla said Ethan had also paid every bill Mason avoided. She left before 1 a.m. without hugging me. The next day, Mason woke me by pounding on my bedroom door. His card had been declined at a gas station. He had tried twice, then used the emergency card linked to our joint account. That one failed too. I checked my banking app. The password no longer worked. Mason began walking across the bedroom, blaming Ethan for acting like a child. I told him not to panic. My husband handled money whenever he felt ignored. By lunch, he would return, explain every number, and expect us to apologize. The internet stopped working at 11. At 12, Mason received an email saying his car insurance payment had failed. By 1, the apartment manager informed him that the financial verification for his application could not be completed. 4 problems. One morning, I called Ethan again. This time he answered. His voice sounded calm. Not angry. Not even satisfied. He asked whether Mason had used our account information for an apartment application. I told him the account belonged to both of us. He said that was not an answer. I explained that Mason needed one chance to build an independent life and that Ethan would have refused before hearing the plan. My husband asked how using his income without permission could be called independence. I told him he was focusing on the wrong issue. The real problem was that he had punished my son because of one birthday joke. Ethan stayed silent for several seconds. I could hear traffic behind him. Then he said the birthday was not one incident. It was the clearest version of a pattern that had existed inside our house for years. He named the missing record player. Tyler's ATM video. The apartment application. Mason laughing while Ethan carried in the cake. My toast. I told him he was collecting unrelated moments to make himself look like a victim. He said they were not unrelated to him. That afternoon, Ethan returned to collect clothes. Mason went upstairs before he entered, claiming he did not want more drama. I met my husband in the dining room, where half the decorations still hung from the walls. He stopped beside the cake table. Only one piece remained. The silver server rested across the empty space where his name had been written in frosting by someone during the party. For the first time, Ethan looked older than 51. He touched the handle of the server and said he had bought it when Mason turned 18 because he believed there would be many family celebrations ahead. His voice became rough on the final word. I heard weakness. I stepped closer and told him we could repair the marriage if he restored the accounts, came home, and apologized to Mason for ruining the days after his birthday. I called it compromise. Ethan called it another payment required before he was allowed to belong. He picked up his bag. Outside, Diane was waiting beside a white sedan. My hotel manager stood with one hand on the open trunk while Ethan carried his things toward her car. I asked why she was there. Diane said Ethan had called because he needed somewhere safe to store several boxes from his office. She did not explain further. She only looked past me at the decorations and then helped him load the bag. I had always treated Diane as someone from my professional life, not his. Seeing her beside him made the scene feel wrong for one brief second. Ethan had people I had never counted because I assumed everyone important entered our home through me. Then Mason called from upstairs and asked whether the internet was fixed. The thought closed. Ethan opened his black notebook, checked one line, and put it away. He told me he would contact me when he was ready to discuss what happened properly. I laughed and said he would return as soon as the hotel bills became uncomfortable. He looked at the house once. Then he left with Diane. That evening, I sent Carla 6 messages. Her replies had always arrived within minutes. This time, none came. By Monday morning, Ethan had still not returned. His side of the closet was half empty, and the black notebook was gone from the dresser. Mason treated both details as proof that my husband was trying to frighten us into begging. I refused to give him that satisfaction. The house had become difficult without Ethan's accounts. Mason borrowed money from Tyler for gas. I paid for groceries with a credit card I kept for emergencies. The internet returned after I opened a new account in my name, but the first payment was almost 3 times what Ethan had been paying. I counted the bills on the dining room table. 5 envelopes, 2 warning emails, one son asking when I would fix everything. Mason said we needed to control the story before Ethan told relatives that we had used him. Tyler agreed. He still had the birthday video, including the part where Ethan asked whether I was ordering him out of his own home. I watched the recording twice. On camera, Ethan looked calm. Mason looked happy. I looked strong. That was enough. Tyler edited the video, so it began after Ethan questioned Mason about work. He removed the comments about money and the family sponsor. The final clip showed a tired mother defending her son from a cold stepfather who had arrived at the birthday with a bad attitude. We posted it with a short message explaining that Ethan had punished our family financially after being asked to leave one celebration. People responded quickly. Some called his actions controlling. Others said a husband should never use money to frighten his wife. Several relatives asked whether I was safe. Of course, I told them I was. Then Mason suggested contacting Ethan's workplace. He said his employer should know that a senior safety specialist had abandoned his family and shut down essential services without warning. I hesitated at the word employer. My hotel career depended on reputation. I understood what one complaint could do. Still, Ethan had already involved Diane, my own manager, when he moved his boxes. He had crossed professional lines first. That was how I justified it. Tyler helped Mason create an anonymous message claiming Ethan had become unstable after a family disagreement. We did not threaten him. We did not accuse him of violence. We only said his behavior had become unpredictable and that his company might want to check on him. I pressed send myself. 2 hours later, Ethan called. He asked whether I had contacted his workplace. I told him people were worried because he had disappeared, cut off the accounts, and refused to speak to his family. He said I knew exactly where he was and why he had left. I reminded him that a husband did not get to vanish whenever marriage became uncomfortable. Ethan asked me to stop posting about him, stop contacting his employer, and meet him privately at the hotel on Wednesday evening. He said we could speak once, honestly, without Mason or Tyler controlling the conversation. For a moment, his request sounded almost human. Then I remembered the declined cards. I told him privacy was how he always won. Behind closed doors, he could reduce everything to payments and dates. This time, the people who watched him support us would also hear how he had treated us. My husband said he was offering me one final chance to keep the matter between us. I laughed. Then I told him the one thing he could not deny. For 11 years, Ethan had provided solutions without giving me presents. He paid bills instead of asking what I feared. He repaired the house instead of repairing conversations. Whenever I needed a husband, he became an accountant. The line stayed silent. He did not argue because it was true. Finally, Ethan said he had loved me through action because action was the only language he trusted. He admitted that his silence had made our home colder. Then he asked whether that failure gave me the right to let Mason steal, lie, and humiliate him. I told him Mason had made mistakes because no real father had ever stayed long enough to guide him. Ethan's voice became quieter. He said he had stayed for 11 years. I answered that staying inside a house was not the same as being family. He stopped trying after that. My husband said he would attend whatever meeting I arranged on Wednesday. He told me to invite everyone I believed needed to hear my side. He would bring what he needed and handle the matter properly. No anger, no threat, acceptance. I took it as surrender. By Tuesday afternoon, I had reserved a private event room at the hotel. I invited Diane, several relatives, Ethan's supervisor, and the friends who had commented beneath the video. I called it a family accountability meeting. Mason wanted Tyler to stream it, and I agreed because Ethan needed to understand that silence could no longer protect him. I sent Carla the invitation. No reply came. That annoyed me, but it did not slow the plan. Wednesday evening, I stood beside the projector while Mason tested the birthday video. 30 chairs faced the screen. On a small table near the front, I placed the silver cake server as a reminder of the celebration Ethan had destroyed. At exactly 7, the door opened. Ethan entered alone, carrying the black notebook and one thin folder. He looked around the room. Then he smiled. I lifted the microphone because I was certain the room belonged to me. Ethan remained beside the door, smiling as if he had entered a meeting he had already finished. I raised the microphone and told everyone that he finally had a chance to explain why he had punished his family over a birthday joke. He did not take the microphone. Instead, he opened the black notebook. Ethan said the first entry was written 3 months earlier when his father's record player disappeared. The next entries marked every question I avoided, every payment Mason expected, and every time we called him our sponsor. He turned toward Tyler and asked him to play the original birthday recording. Tyler said the edited video was already on the projector. Ethan looked at Diane. My manager stepped forward and connected her laptop. She had saved the full video after Tyler streamed it publicly. The screen showed Mason calling Ethan our family sponsor. It showed me laughing. It showed Ethan carrying in the cake while nobody helped him. Then came my toast. My own voice filled the room, telling my husband that my son's birthday would be better if he disappeared. Nobody laughed this time. Ethan placed several printed pages on the front table. There were car payments, insurance charges, tuition receipts, grocery transfers, and the failed apartment verification linked to his income. Beside them were photographs of his father's record player and the online listing Mason had used to sell it. Mason stood and said Ethan was trying to embarrass us with private information. Ethan answered that we had made the matter public first. Tyler moved toward Diane's laptop, but she closed it before he could touch the keyboard. Then he unplugged his phone from the streaming cable and left without looking at Mason. I tried to explain that Ethan had always controlled us through money. His supervisor, sitting in the second row, said calmly that paying another adult's bills was not the same as owing him a life. The sentence did not move. It simply stayed there. Ethan said the notebook had never been where he hid his feelings. It was where he kept a record because feelings could be denied and dates could not. The birthday entry was the final page. He had written my exact words, the time, and one sentence beneath them. They asked me to disappear, so I will remove only what belongs to me. Carla's chair was empty. Ethan's petition for divorce and formal move-out notice required Mason and me to leave the house within 30 days. I moved into a small apartment where Mason slept behind a curtain in the living room. My emergency credit card reached its limit before the second month ended. Carla stopped answering, and several relatives removed me from the family chat. Tyler deleted the birthday video, blocked Mason, and never returned the money he had lent him. Diane removed me from private events after I used a hotel room to attack my husband in front of his employer. I thought putting Ethan before an audience would finally force him to feel what I had felt for years. Instead, the audience gave him something I never expected to lose: witnesses who saw the difference between a silent man and a powerless one. I believed his money made him useful. The record showed that his restraint had made our cruelty possible. The silver cake server lay inside the last box I carried from his house. I told Ethan to disappear from my son's birthday, and he left us alone with the bill.